The might of America could soon be over. US dominance is set to wane and other superpowers are on the rise. As global wealth and influence are predicted to shift dramatically, what will this new world order mean for us? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Shuli Ghosh. This week, US intelligence agencies publish their expectations for the year 2025, and it makes somber reading for President-elect Barack Obama. The National Intelligence Council says politically, US global power will decline, with the rise of China, India and Russia, among others. Economically, American dominance will fade. The US dollar may no longer be the world's major currency, and rising economies like China and India are likely to have greater influence. Militarily, America is expected to remain the strongest actor, but it will be competing with increasingly powerful rivals such as China. Well, to analyse this report and what it means for the world, I'm joined by my guests. In Doha, Hadi Amr, director of the Brookings Doha Centre. In London, Andrew Leung, an international China specialist. And in Moscow, Alexander Pikayev, a political analyst from the Institute of World Economy and International Relations. Gentlemen, welcome to all of you. Hadi, if I can start with you, just put this into context for us. How much importance is attached to this report? How close attention will Obama be paying to it?
It's a very important report. It's central to how the U.S. looks at the world. It's a report that comes out with regular frequency. An author of one of the former reports was a friend and a colleague from Princeton University, and I can tell you it's taken very seriously, and it paints a big picture for the horizon, the look ahead, not next year, but 20 years down the line.
OK, well, let's take that look ahead. Let's start with the economy. Andrew, I suppose we shouldn't be surprised, given the current global economic crisis, that economic power is shifting from west to east.
Yes, I think that we're beginning to see that. And I think this is underpinned by what I would some commentators and authors call the 3 billion new capitalists. You are seeing all of in recent years something we haven't seen in past centuries. That is the simultaneous urbanization and industrialization of more than one huge country. You're talking about China, you're talking about India, and you're talking about a lot of other countries, both in Latin America, Central Asia, Eastern Europe, and in Asia, all industrializing to various degrees, but at the same time. So this putting tremendous pressure on things like resources, energy, and it's changing the geopolitical landscape in the world.
But in terms of influence, I mean, this Global Trends report is saying that China stands to have more effect on the world over the next 2 decades than any other country. How is the world going to adjust to that? How are countries like India going to react to that?
Well, I think that this is also a function of how China is running its economy and, in fact, running the whole country. Now, because China is not a democracy, but the other side of the coin is that China would be able to push ahead their industrialization program, their urbanization program, much more effectively, provided there is a good quality leadership. I mean, you look at China in the past, say before China opened up, at the time of Mao Zedong, this sort of things hadn't happened. But it's only when China opened up and there was an enlightened leadership and is trying to be part of the globalized world that we are seeing a dramatic increase in China's industrialization. Now, of course, in terms of globalization, China needs the resources, and a lot of other countries, United States, India, and for that matter, Western Europe, also require these resources. But unfortunately, most of the fossil fuel, particularly, is concentrated in some of the world's less politically stable areas. So you're bound to have a degree of conflict. But on the other hand, there's a great deal of international interdependence. You look at even in terms of money, finance, as the whole world is now learning to its cost. This is a reflection, in a way, apart from, of course, the regulations and the unbridled financial kind of leveraging of various products. This is also a reflection of the flow of money around the world.
Okay.
As there is a great deal of savings, from China going into America, and of course driven by China's exports.
What about Russia? There is, already there's a redrawing of the balance of power, as Andrew has been explaining there. But questions like countries like Russia, there is a question mark over where you're going to be in 2025, because it will depend on whether you can diversify or break into global markets. What do you think Russia's relationship with the rest of the world is going to be?
Well, actually, economically, average Russian is living 5 times better than average Chinese, and he is or she is living 3 times worse than average American. So that Russia is somewhere in between developed and developing world, and it is a high economic priority to have continuing economic growth at 6, 7, 8% a year, which is what Russian economy demonstrated during this decade before this financial crisis. Impact of this financial crisis on Russian economy is still unclear, but it enlightened much growing interdependence between Russian and Western economy, and I think that any future Russian leadership would have to take into account such interdependence. Therefore, I believe that the major Russian task would be to maintain a favorable international background for its economic development. Russia, I think, would like to have good relations with all major players in the world.
What about the fact that this report says that America might not have the military advantage that it once did, and there could be a proliferation of long-range weapons?
Well, there are several global problems where the United States and Russia are on the one side of the barricade, so to speak. It includes nuclear non-proliferation, it includes fight with international terrorism, it also includes non-proliferation of long-range and maybe not only long-range missiles, some other global problems like climate change, so that there is a quite long list of a positive international agenda.
But all of which require different policies. All of which require different policies from America. Hadi, are any of these factors going to lead to a change in policy, foreign policy, perhaps Middle Eastern policy, from American lawmakers?
A couple of key things. I think the first thing to keep in mind is that we are in a transition period. The Cold War ended 20 years ago. You had sort of 10 years of momentum where the world was trying to figure out what to do, and now we're entering a new period. In terms of the Middle East, I think there were 2 key things to focus on in this report. First of all is that the report, or in the greater Muslim world anyway, the report focused on a number of countries, Algeria, Pakistan, Nigeria, and Yemen, where there's going to be enormous and explosive population growth. The question is, how is U.S. policy and really global policy going to tackle that population growth? Will these countries grow into vast areas of poverty and despair that can lead to fertile recruiting grounds for terrorism? On the other hand, we have the 60-year history of the Israeli-Arab conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian question, and the question is the world going to keep focusing its political capital year after year, its energy, its time on trying to solve the Israeli-Palestinian, the Israeli-Lebanese, the Israeli-Syrian conflict?
But maybe the increasing power of other countries like China and India means more countries will start coming in to take a stand or make policies on Middle East and the whole Middle East peace process.
Well, exactly, and the question is the world, can the United States now work with China, India, Russia, the European Union, and don't forget Saudi Arabia was invited to the G20 just last week. Will these countries come together to solve this problem and also solve the problem in Iraq so that it can move beyond and address the really pressing global issues that we have, like climate change, like this global financial crisis? My view is, and I think if you read between the lines of the National Intelligence Council report, is that the world can no longer afford to be mired in spending its energy and trying trying to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict when it should be focusing on climate change and the international financial crisis.
Andrew, do you think challenging these predictions in this report is going to take some pretty tough medicine? Do you think the US should concentrate less on issues like the Middle East, as Hadi has suggested, and more on cultivating relationships with Asia and looking at other issues like global warming and fiscal policies?
Well, very much so. But on the other hand, I must qualify that in the sense that if we talk about energy and climate change, you can't get away from the Middle East because most of the oil and gas come through those areas. But what I would like to highlight is that we are now in a world, the whole report is focusing on a world which is much more interdependent, much more interconnected, much more multidimensional. And all the problems I've read from the report actually fall into four areas. The first one is, I've already mentioned, interdependence. The second one, of course, we already covered, is the energy dependence on demand for energy and resources. But I think the third one, you look at the so-called arc of instability, it is really highlights the questions of development. Various countries want to develop, but they have different geographical, geopolitical, and cultural, economic backgrounds, and they may need different paths to further the development. So it's how to address the development issues. In fact, in a certain part of the report, it says that if some of these unstable countries, some of the development problems are resolved, then they would lead to a higher degree of stability. So development is also very, very good medicine, a very good antidote against instability. So that's the point I would like to make. But one final point is how do we approach conflict resolution? Now, we have seen there were some resolutions in the past, maybe in Eastern Europe, in Africa. And sometimes some countries tend to just send armies over, boots on the ground. But this may or may not resolve the issue. If you look at some countries in Africa, for example, the conflict may well be a product of development problems. So you need to build infrastructure, both the hard infrastructure and the soft infrastructure.
Okay.
And I think countries like China and America would have a common ground to play. Okay,
Andrew, sorry to stop you there. Briefly, I may add, because we're just going to take a short break, but we will come back. And coming up in part 2, what does the shifting world order mean for nations and their people? Stay with us.